Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. I have a fairly bland piece of fabric. One might almost consider it ugly, and a definitely ugly cushion. I'm going to turn this piece of fabric into something a little bit better. I'm not going to add any other fabric at all. My mission today is to make a cushion cover, but make this look so much better than it actually is. Let's see what we can come up with. I have a piece of upholstery fabric here that is 60 inches wide, so it's the whole width of the roll, by 19 inches. I'm going to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the side of my cushions. My cushion is an 18-inch square, so I'm using 19 inches wide for the fabric. So that's 19 inches by 60 inches, and then I want a couple of strips of fabric that are also 19 inches wide by 4.5 inches. So I want 2 of those and a 14-inch zip. Let's get started. The first thing you want to do is fold the fabric in half, find the centre, and I'll mark the centre on both sides. Open that out and I'll just draw a line right across the centre of that fabric. And that is my first line drawn, and that'll be my guideline for the next line. Then what you'll do is measure 4 inches from this line out, and we'll do that all the way across. So I'm going to use the 4-inch line on my ruler. That will line up on the line that I've just drawn, and I'll mark my next line. Then the next line, I'll do exactly the same thing. That will be my guideline, line up the 4 inches and draw a line. I will do that all the way across. I also need to find the centre this way. So we've got 19 inches, half of that is 9.5 inches. I'll measure that all the way down the length of the fabric, mark that line, and then do 4 inches apart on either side. So here are the markings on my fabric. I've got 4-inch grids on here now, and we can now take this to the machine and start sewing. It's actually a really simple process. So you can start anywhere. We're going to sew down the short lines, and what we want to do is fold the fabric on the short line, and you can pin it or clip it, but you want to make sure that your fold lines are really straight. So I will mark this on every one of those short lines. Okay, so you can see what I've done here. I've folded along the line and just clipped it together, same here and same here, and these are all 4 inches apart. So I'll continue to do that all the way along the short edges of the fabric, but rather than clip it or pin it, I'm just going to go straight to the machine, fold it and sew it as I go. So let's go to the machine and do that for the entire piece of fabric. When we're at the machine, our seam needs to be 1 inch from the very top edge. Find a guide on your machine so that you can sit that there and you can run your fabric along where your needle comes down 1 inch away from the edge. And you'll do that on every single one of these lines. So we're going to have a 1-inch fold sewn all the way along. I have a magnetic seam guide here, and I've placed the edge of that 1 inch from where the needle comes down. So I've just used my seam gauge to measure that, and I've put that down. If you don't have a magnetic seam guide, I'll often use a piece of ribbon, and I'll just tape the edge of the ribbon down to the 1-inch mark, or whichever marking I need. I'll tape that in place, and then I'll use the straight edge of the ribbon as a guide. This is the edge that I'm actually following rather than where the needle comes down. Place the fold of your fabric along the edge of that seam gauge and sew all the way down. I'm also increasing my stitch length as well. It'll make the job go quicker. You don't have to have small stitches. So my stitch length is at 3.5. So there you can see that first row is sewn, and I just have a nice little flap sitting there, which is 1 inch high. I'll go and do the next one and then continue on and do all of the others. The other thing I'm going to do, rather than sewing every single row in the same direction, I'm going to alternate my rows. So I've done the first row coming down the fabric, I'll do the third row coming down the fabric, and then I'll do the fifth row coming down, and I'll do alternate rows all the way along the fabric. Then I'll turn around and come back and do the other side. That just helps prevent the fabric from shifting and becoming one long diagonal piece. I'll grab the third row instead of the second, line up that top edge and continue on. Then I'll skip that row and I'll do the following row. And now all I'm going to do is just fold the edges rather than clipping them, and I can fold that as I sew. Once you've done every second row all the way across, turn your fabric around the other way and come back and do all those alternate rows that you haven't done yet. The line right on the very outside edge, I'm not stitching that at either end. There's not enough fabric for me to have a 1-inch fold. The fabric was only 60 inches and I've tried to use up as much as I can, but we don't need that one. After the fabric's been turned around, just continue on exactly the same as before. Okay, now we have the short edges all sewn up. It's time to start making the pattern for our fabric. Again, I'm going to start with the center line that we have here. So we've got the center and a few more lines. With the center line, we want to take the fold of our fabric and push it out. So you can see this piece of fabric is sitting in underneath that fold there. So the center line, the first row, we're going to push toward the outside. The next two, we're going to face each other. So we'll take this fold and push that toward me, this fold and push that away from me. Line up those lines that we've drawn. And pin that in place. So now what we've got is a little flap with the two pieces facing and one away. Go to the next section. We're going to place the fabric together again. And we're going to continue this all the way until we get to the last fold. So what we have now is the center row with all of the folds faced in toward each other, except for the last one. Now we're going to go back to the machine and we're going to sew all the way along that entire row there to secure those folds in place. Once we've done that, we'll go to the next row and we're going to do the opposite. So where this row is faced out, we're going to face that in and take this one and fold that in as well. And we'll do the same thing on the outside edge. So we'll get the first one done and I'll show you what to do with the rest of it. So it doesn't matter whether you start at the fold out or the two folds in, it makes no difference. I'm at the section where the top edge is, where the first fold is facing away. I'll secure that with a back stitch. I'm going to follow along that drawn line all the way to the end. When I get to the folds in the fabric, remove my pins and I'll line up the drawn line and continue on. So I'll just do that all the way down, keeping the folds together on all of these. And that's it. The first section is done. Now we just need to do a few more rows. Okay, so you can see how that's come together in the center. The next thing I'm going to do, rather than going to the lines on either side, I'm going to go to the lines on the outside and I'm going to follow exactly the same pattern that we've already done. So that fold there, facing out, So at both ends the folds are facing out. The next one we're going to continue and do exactly the same thing that we've done in the centre. So remember, don't do the ones to either side, we just want to do the outside lines. Okay, I've done the outside edges of all of the folds there. We'll take this back to the machine and we'll sew straight down the two outside lines. Okay, very simple, just sew all the way down. And then I can come around and do the other side. It's really a very quick project. It's just a whole bunch of straight lines. Okay, the centre and the two outsides are done. Now we need to work on these two lines on either side of the centre. Take the loose section here and fold that away from these lines that we've stitched in the opposite direction. So we're going to do exactly the same thing, but we're folding the fabric in the opposite direction. On this side we'll do the same. So fold the flap away from the outside edge, fold this one toward it, and then this one here we're going to fold toward yourself again and grab the next one and fold that together. So we're doing the opposite of what we've done on those previous stitching lines. So you can see how that's starting to look now. Still ugly though, isn't it? But it'll get there. Now we're ready to finish sewing up all of these little pleats or folds. Again, we'll go straight down the line and stitch them all in place. Doesn't matter which end you start with, just secure all those folds in place. And then I'll turn it around and continue on the other side. Let's take our 14-inch zip and our two pieces at 19 inches. So I've marked the centre of my fabric and the centre of my zip, and now it's time to place the zip down. So let's take this, place the bumpy side faced down, and we're going to line up those markings and we'll sew that in place from one end of the tape to the other end. Remember to move your slider out of the way as you come to it. Once we've done that side, we're going to line up the centre of the fabric with the other side of the zip. So with both sides of the zipper tape clipped down to both sides of the fabric, we can take this to the machine and stitch the zip in place. So back stitch at the beginning and the end and just sew close to the zipper teeth. Move the slider out of the way when you get to it. Come back and start on the other side. So we've sewn the zip in place down both long edges, and what I've also done off camera is back at the machine at the end of the zip I've come in 1/2 inch and the zip finishes down here. I've started back around about where the metal tabs are and I've sewn a 1/2 inch seam all the way down here to close up the end piece. I've done the same thing on this side here. So I've just started back where the metal tabs are and sewn that 1/2 inch seam. So what that does is just hides the tacky ends of the zipper tape underneath. We need to go and top stitch now, and we're going to top stitch on either side of the teeth, and I'll just fan this out just on the very edge there and then continue on with the top stitch until I get to the end here. I'll move my slide out of the way and fan that back in again until I get to the end. I'm not going to sew where the seam is because I don't want to stitch over these metal tabs. So I want to make sure I keep away from the metal tabs on both ends of the zip. So top stitch all the way along on both sides. So when you do that, make sure that you've got the seams open at the outside edge. And then I'll come back and do the other side. The zip is all nice and neat now. I'm going to take this panel and place that onto this piece of fabric. So just line that up along the side edge here. And remember, I've got a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to sew all the way down here. When I've done that, I'm going to take the other end here and attach that to this side. So we'll sew this panel to both of the short edges of our fabric. This is going to become the centre back of our cushion. Back stitch at the top end, all the way down to the end, back stitch at the other end. And then you can sew the other side in place as well. Okay, I've sewn the back panel in. And now all we need to do is sew up the side seams and the cushion is completely finished. Open up your zip. We want to be able to turn this inside out. We want to be able to turn this the right way around. So open your zip now and we'll line up this centre back seam in between these two flaps here. So we've got a couple of flaps just there. We want to find the centre there and you can line up that centre back along here. So I've just pulled that taut so that it's roughly in the centre, found the centre between the flaps there and clipped it in place. And we'll do the same on the other end. Find the centre and clip it all in place on both sides. Okay, everything's lined up on both sides. We've got our zip open so that we can turn everything the right way around, and we can now go and finish that side seam. Now you'll notice I haven't lined this and I haven't finished any of the edges. If you want to, you can go and serge or overlock all of the raw edges. I'm not going to for this one. I think the edges will be fine and the pillows and the covering is rarely, if ever, going to come off. So I'm just going to sew straight down the side seams. And remember, we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Because I'm using upholstery fabric and there's going to be so many layers of fabric that I'm sewing through, I'm going to go and stitch each side twice. And we'll turn it over and do the same on the other side. The last thing we need to do now is just clip the corners. We can turn the cover the right way around, poke out the corners. And let's put our cushion inside. Once you're done, zip it up and we'll have a look. All right, I'm not sure that I did this fabric any favours at all. This is the back of the cushion. If you've got the panel down the centre with your zip and the pattern that continues on just around the sides. Here we have the front of the cushion. Well, from a distance it doesn't look too bad, but it was a very simple way to turn a bland piece of fabric into something a little bit more decorative. What do you think? I think the idea's there. I'm not sure that I actually like the outcome. I might have to look at it on the couch from a distance. Definitely going to have to wash the fabric because the red marks, I've used a thick fabric marker so that you could see what lines I was drawing. I've used a big thick fabric marker. I'm going to have to give this cover a wash now to get rid of all of those lines. Hopefully they'll go. But anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Simple little project to turn a plain old piece of fabric into something a little bit more decorative. Catch you next time.